Success has a sound, and it's not what most folks think. It's not the applause of a crowd. It's not your voice telling everyone about what you're going to do. It's the quiet turning of pages late at night when others sleep. It's the soft tap of keys on your keyboard while the world is still dark. It's the sound of your shoes on the pavement, running that extra mile when no one's watching. That's the real sound of success. And most people never hear it because they're too busy talking. You know, I've noticed something interesting over the years. The people who talk the most about success often achieve the least, and the ones who quietly build their empires. They're too busy working to tell you about it. Now it's a lesson worth learning. What you do in the quiet moments defines who you become in the spotlight. That's not just some nice saying. It's the fundamental truth about achievement that most people miss. They want the spotlight without the quiet moments. They want the harvest without planting any seeds. Let me tell you something that might change your life. Your success will speak so loudly that people won't need to hear you talk about it. But first you must become comfortable with the silence of daily discipline, that space where real growth happens. Most people can't stand silence. They fill every moment with noise, with talk, with promises about what they'll do someday. But you and I know someday is not a day of the week. It never shows up on any calendar. The question isn't what you say about your dreams. The question is what you're willing to do about them when no one's looking. That's where your future is decided, in those private moments of choice. Success isn't built on a stage. It's built in the workshop of your daily habits. And that workshop, it's usually pretty quiet. The greatest achievers I've met in my life share this one trait. They don't need to announce their intentions. They're too busy turning those intentions into results. You see, working in silence isn't about being secretive. It's about being so focused on your craft that talking about it becomes a distraction. It's about understanding that every minute spent talking about what you're going to do is a minute not spent doing it. Now, let's get practical about this concept. There's a reason why most people choose to talk instead of act. Talking is easy. Acting is hard. Talking provides immediate gratification. You say something, people nod, maybe they even praise your ambition. It feels good, but that feeling, it's fool's gold. It gives you the emotional reward of achievement without any of the actual achievement. Think about a garden. You don't stand over freshly planted seeds yelling, "Grow! I just planted you. Everyone come look at my future garden." No, you quietly water those seeds every day. You pull the weeds without complaint. You work with nature's timeline, not demanding immediate results. And then one day, without fanfare, the harvest arrives. And that harvest speaks for itself. Your life works the same way. The seeds you plant in silence, the skills you develop, the knowledge you gain, the problems you solve, they're growing even when you don't see immediate results. Trust the process. Keep working. The results will speak for themselves when the time is right. Now, there's something powerful about the compound effect that most people miss. Small, consistent efforts may not look impressive in a single day, but stacked up over months and years, they create massive results that seem to appear almost magically to outside observers. If you improve just one each day for a year, you'll end up 37 times better by the end of that year. Now, 365 better just adding one for each day, but 37 times better because of the compounding effect. That's the power of quiet, consistent growth. But here's the catch. You won't see dramatic changes day to day, and that's where most people quit. They want immediate feedback, immediate results. When they don't get, they assume their approach isn't working. So they stop, switch directions, start something new. And the cycle of never quite breaking through continues. The silent worker understands this isn't how success operates. They know that progress often happens slowly, then all at once. They're patient enough to keep going during those quiet growth phases when nothing seems to be happening. Take water as it heats up. From 32 degrees to 211 degrees, you see bubbles forming, but the water remains water. Nothing dramatic happens. But at 212 degrees, everything changes as it transforms to steam, which can power engines and move mountains. That one extra degree makes all the difference. Your work ethic functions the same way. Keep putting in those daily efforts even when the water's still just water. Keep going when others would quit, because you never know when you're just 1 degree away from your breakthrough moment. I've counseled thousands of people over the years, and I can tell you with certainty, most quit right before their breakthrough was about to happen. They worked in silence for a while, but they couldn't sustain it when immediate results didn't appear. Don't make that mistake. The power of working in silence isn't just about avoiding the pitfalls of premature celebration. It's also about creating genuine value through focused work. And that's something we need to talk about. Value creation happens when you're fully engaged with your work, and not when you're talking about it. When you remove the distractions of constantly seeking validation and attention for your efforts, something magical happens. Your work improves. Your focus deepens. You start creating things of genuine worth. Consider the craftsmen of old, who would spend years mastering their trade before ever taking on an apprentice or displaying their finest work. They understood that the quality of their creation was what mattered, not how many people knew they were working on. In today's world of social media and constant sharing, we've lost something important. We've lost the sacred space of creation that exists before showing our work to the world. We've lost the patience to develop our skills in private before seeking public recognition. But the market doesn't lie. It doesn't care about your intentions or your announcements. It cares about the value you create. And value creation happens in those quiet hours of focused effort when you're not thinking about who's watching or what they'll think. I once visited a furniture maker who had become renowned for his extraordinary pieces. His workshop was miles from anywhere, and he rarely participated in the social events of his industry. When I asked him why he worked in such isolation, his answer was profound. I'm not isolated from what matters. I'm in constant conversation with the wood, with the design, with the craft itself. Everything else is just noise that gets in the way of that conversation. That's a perspective worth adopting. Your work isn't just about the end product. It's about the relationship you develop with your craft when you give it your full, undivided attention. When you work in silence, you can hear the subtle guidance that leads to mastery. It brings us to an important truth. Creating value requires saying no to distractions. And one of the biggest distractions is the urge to talk about your work instead of doing it. Every time you resist the temptation to seek premature validation, you strengthen your ability to focus on what truly matters. The marketplace rewards results, not intentions. You can talk about customer service all day long, but if your customers don't feel served, your words mean nothing. You can announce your commitment to quality, but if your products fall apart, the market won't be fooled. Your success speaks through the value you create, not through your declarations about the value you plan to create someday. Now, between your goals and your results lies one critical factor: discipline. Not motivation, not inspiration, not even passion, but plain unsexy discipline. The ability to show up and do the work even when you don't feel like it. The willingness to honor your commitments to yourself, even when no one would know if you didn't. Discipline is the bridge that turns dreams into reality. And here's what most people don't understand about discipline. It works in silence. It's not flashy. It doesn't make for good social media posts. Got up at 5 a.m. again to work on my business plan, doesn't get as many likes as just signed $1 million deal. But that early morning discipline is what makes the deal possible in the first place. Great achievers throughout history have understood this fundamental truth. What you do when no one's watching determines what you achieve when everyone's watching. Private disciplines create public rewards. Consider any field of achievement: music, sports, business, art. The moments on stage or in the spotlight represent just a tiny fraction of the total time invested. The real work happens during the countless hours of practice, preparation, and persistence that no one ever sees. I've had the privilege of knowing Olympic athletes who trained for years for a performance that lasted minutes. I've worked with authors who spent a decade perfecting a book that people read in a week. I've advised entrepreneurs who worked 18-hour days for years before their overnight success. In every case, their public glory was built on a foundation of private discipline. Discipline has another interesting quality. It compounds over time. When you first start exercising discipline in an area of your life, it's hard. You feel the resistance, your old habits fight back. But with each act of discipline, you build momentum. What once required tremendous willpower eventually becomes your new normal. This is how extraordinary lives are built, not through occasional heroic efforts, but through daily disciplines maintained over time. Not through loudly declaring your intentions, but through quietly fulfilling them day after day. Most people overestimate what they can accomplish in a day and underestimate what they can accomplish in a decade of disciplined effort. They want the shortcuts, the hacks, the quick fixes. But true success doesn't work that way. It's built through thousands of small, correct decisions stacked one on top of another. And here's something else about discipline. It functions best in silence. The moment you start talking about how disciplined you are, something shifts. You start performing for an audience rather than pursuing excellence for its own sake. You become attached to others' perception of your discipline rather than the results it produces. The truly disciplined don't need to announce their discipline. They let the results speak for themselves. They understand that discipline isn't a virtue to be displayed. It's a tool to be used in the quiet construction of an extraordinary life. Now, every journey toward meaningful achievement will face challenges. That's certain. The question isn't whether obstacles will appear. They will. The question is how you'll respond to them. And this is where working in silence shows its true power. When challenges arise, most people immediately look for sympathy. They announce their struggles. They tell everyone why their path is harder than others. They seek validation for their difficulties rather than solutions. But the quiet achiever takes a different approach. They face their challenges privately. They spend their energy solving problems rather than discussing them. They save their words and use them instead to ask better questions, seek necessary help, and find practical solutions. This isn't about suffering in silence or denying reality. It's about understanding that complaining depletes the very energy you need to overcome obstacles. Every minute spent explaining why something is hard is a minute not spent figuring out how to make it easier. I've always been fascinated by how different people respond to the same challenge. Give two people identical obstacles and you'll see completely different approaches. One will tell everyone about the problem, seek sympathy, explain why it's so difficult. The other will quietly get to work on solutions. Guess which one actually overcomes the challenge? It's rarely the one doing all the talking. There's a story about a young man who wanted to learn martial arts. He found a renowned master and asked to be taught. The master agreed, but with one condition. For the first year, the student wasn't allowed to tell anyone he was studying martial arts. Confused but determined, the young man agreed. For 12 months, he trained rigorously while maintaining his silence. He faced soreness, frustration, and slow progress, all without the comfort of telling others about his journey. When friends asked what he'd been up to, he deflected the questions. After a year, the master finally said, "Now, you may tell others that you study with me." Puzzled, the student asked why the secrecy had been necessary. The master smiled. If you had told others you were studying martial arts, you would have been tempted to talk about your training instead of focusing on it. When you face difficulties, you might have satisfied yourself with explaining your challenges rather than overcoming them. By keeping silent, you put all your energy into the training itself. That's the hidden benefit of facing challenges quietly. When you remove the option of talking about your struggles, you're left with only one choice: dealing with. This approach also builds resilience in a way that seeking constant validation cannot. When you overcome obstacles without fanfare, you develop an inner strength that doesn't depend on external recognition. You learn to motivate yourself rather than relying on others' encouragement. You become self-sufficient in your determination. And when success finally comes, it's sweeter because you know the full measure of what it took to achieve it, including all the challenges you overcame without announcement or applause. In a world obsessed with attention, there's a clear difference between those who seek the spotlight and those who earn it. Attention seekers focus on being noticed. Achievers focus on being worthy of notice. And that distinction makes all the difference. Our culture increasingly confuses visibility with value. We've created systems that reward people for simply being seen, regardless of what they've actually accomplished. Social media followers, views, likes, these are the new currencies of attention, but they're poor measures of actual achievement. The quiet achiever understands this distinction. They're not against recognition. They simply understand that genuine recognition is a byproduct of meaningful contribution, not the goal itself. I consider the difference in approach. How can I get people to notice me? The achiever asks, how can I create something worth noticing? One leads to superficial validation. The other leads to substantive accomplishment. I've watched countless promising careers stall because people became more interested in being known for their work than in improving the quality of that work. They started believing their own publicity before they'd actually earned it. They became personalities before they became professionals. The tragedy is that their hunger for premature recognition often prevented them from doing the quiet work that would have naturally attracted the recognition they wanted. They chose the shortcut of attention over the longer path of achievement, and ultimately received neither lasting attention nor meaningful achievement. True success follows a different pattern. First, you focus entirely on your work, improving your skills, solving problems, creating value. You care more about the quality of what you produce than who knows you produced it. Then, as the quality of your work increases, recognition follows naturally. Not because you chased it, but because quality demands attention eventually. This patient approach requires trust that good work gets noticed in time. Trust that meaningful contribution creates its own spotlight. That trust isn't always easy to maintain, especially in a world of overnight sensations and viral fame. But it's the only path to recognition that doesn't fade as quickly as it appeared. I remember talking with a songwriter who spent 10 years writing music before anyone knew his name. While others were busy promoting themselves on every platform, he focused on his craft. I figured I had a choice, he told me. I could spend my energy trying to get people interested in mediocre songs, or I could spend that same energy writing songs so good that people couldn't ignore them. I chose the second path. Today, his music is known worldwide. The quality of his work created an attention that no amount of self-promotion could have generated. That's the irony of working in silence and letting success speak for itself. By focusing on your work rather than who's watching it, you actually create something worth watching. By caring more about quality than applause, you eventually receive more genuine applause than those who sought it directly. The choice is yours. Chase attention or attract it. One path leads to momentary visibility. The other leads to lasting impact. One puts the spotlight on you. The other puts the spotlight on your contribution. Choose wisely. This philosophy of quiet achievement isn't just about external results. It's also about who you become in the process. And that brings us to an essential truth. Building character happens through private victories long before public ones. Character isn't formed in the spotlight. It's formed in those quiet moments of decision when no one is looking, and the only witness to your choice is your own conscience. Will you take the shortcut or the high road? Will you do what's easy or what's right? Will you keep your promise to yourself even when breaking it would be more convenient? These private choices might seem small in the moment. No one's handing out medals for resisting the snooze button, for doing that extra set when you're tired, for keeping your word when breaking it would be easier. But these seemingly minor decisions are actually defining your character fiber by fiber. Fred, by the time your character is tested in public, and the outcome has already been determined by the thousands of private choices you've made when no one was watching. Public character is merely the accumulated result of private decisions. I've counseled many people who couldn't understand why they crumbled under pressure in important moments. They practiced the skills. They'd prepared the presentation. They knew the material. But something within gave way when the stakes were high. What they didn't realize was that character isn't built during the big moments. It's merely revealed then. The building happens during all those small, private victories that no one applauds and no one sees. It happens when you choose discipline over convenience, long-term growth over short-term comfort, truth over deception, even in matters that seem insignificant. True character is who you are when no one's looking. And who you are when no one's looking eventually becomes who you are when everyone's looking. There's no separation between the two, just a time delay. Think about trust in business relationships. Trust isn't granted because someone claims to be trustworthy. It's earned through a consistent pattern of keeping promises and honoring commitments. One broken promise can destroy years of built-up trust. Why? Because people instinctively understand that what they can see is just the tip of the iceberg. If someone breaks a promise to you, it probably wasn't the first promise they broke, it's just the first one you witnessed. Now, let's talk about something nobody enjoys but everyone experiences. Failure. It's not a question of if you'll fail, but when, how often, and WSE. Most importantly, how you'll respond. Working in silence creates a unique approach to failure. When you haven't broadcast your intentions, failure becomes a private teacher rather than a public embarrassment. You can extract the lessons without managing the perceptions. You can focus on improvement rather than explanation. Most people's relationship with failure is complicated by their need to save face. They've told everyone what they're going to accomplish, so when things don't work out, they feel compelled to explain, justify, and sometimes even distort what happened. They create elaborate reasons why the failure wasn't really their fault or wasn't really a failure. All that energy spent managing perceptions is energy not spent learning and growing. It's a tragic misallocation of resources at exactly the moment when clear thinking is most needed. The quiet worker avoids this trap. When they fail, and they don't need to craft a narrative for others. They can look honestly at what happened, extract the valuable lessons, adjust their approach, and move forward without the burden of public explanation. This isn't about hiding your failures or denying them. It's about understanding that failure is part of the learning process, not a performance for others to evaluate. It's about creating the psychological safety you need to examine failure clearly rather than defensively. I've known entrepreneurs who failed multiple times before finding their successful formula. The ones who worked quietly through those failures maintained their focus on solving the core problems. The ones who had loudly announced their venture spent excessive energy managing perceptions, defending decisions, and explaining away results. Guess which group learned faster? Guess which group eventually succeeded? Almost always, it was those who treated failure as a private teacher rather than a public event. This approach to failure requires humility, the willingness to be wrong, to admit mistakes, to change course when necessary. Pride makes us defend and explain. Humility lets us learn and improve. Working in silence cultivates this humility. When you're not constantly seeking approval and validation, you can hear feedback more clearly. You can evaluate results more honestly. You can admit when you're wrong without feeling that your identity is threatened. The path to mastery in any field is paved with failures. The question isn't whether you'll fail. You will. The question is whether those failures will teach you what you need to know to eventually succeed. And that depends largely on how clearly you can see them without the distortion of ego or the need to maintain appearances. When you work in silence, you give yourself the freedom to fail productively. You create the conditions for rapid learning rather than elaborate justification. You focus on getting better rather than looking good. And here's the beautiful irony. This approach to failure, facing it honestly, learning from it quickly, and moving forward without excuse or delay is precisely what leads to the kind of success that eventually speaks for itself. The quiet path to mastery isn't glamorous. It doesn't make for exciting stories during the journey. but it's the most reliable route to excellence in any field. Mastery requires thousands of hours of deliberate practice. Practice that stretches your abilities, that focuses on your weaknesses, that corrects your errors. It requires patience, persistence, and a dedication to continuous improvement. Above all, it requires a love of the process itself, not just the outcomes it eventually produces. Working in silence aligns perfectly with these requirements of mastery. When you're not performing for an audience, you can focus entirely on improvement rather than impression. You can work on the fundamentals without worrying whether they look impressive. You can make the small adjustments that lead to big improvements over time. As we near the end of our time together, let's talk about the ultimate goal of working in silence, letting your results tell your story. There's a power in this approach that goes beyond avoiding the pitfalls of premature celebration or excessive talk. It's about creating a legacy that speaks through your contribution rather than your claim. Words are fleeting. Results endure. What you say about yourself might be remembered for a day. What you create, build, or contribute might be remembered for generations. Think about the people who have truly shaped your life. The teachers who expanded your mind, the leaders who inspired your best efforts, the creators whose work moved you deeply. Do you remember them primarily for what they said about themselves? Or do you remember them for what they actually did, created, or contributed? Almost always, it's the latter. Their impact on you came through their work, not their words about their work. That's the kind of legacy worth building, one that speaks through results rather than announcements, one that influences others through contribution rather than proclamation. I know a man who transformed his industry without ever writing a book about it, without speaking at conferences, without building a personal brand. He simply solved problems that others couldn't solve. He created solutions of such obvious value that people sought them out. He improved his field through direct contribution rather than commentary about contribution. Today, his methods are taught in universities. His approaches have become industry standards. His influence extends far beyond those who know his name. Why? Because he let his results speak for him, and results speak a universal language that transcends personality, promotion, or platform. That's the power of letting your success speak for itself. It creates an influence based on substance rather than style, on contribution rather than charisma, on results rather than rhetoric. This doesn't mean you should never speak about your work or share your knowledge. Communication has its place. Teaching others what you've learned can multiply your impact. But there's a world of difference between speaking from a foundation of demonstrated results and speaking instead of creating those results. When your words are backed by a record of achievement, they carry a weight that no amount of clever phrasing can match. When you've actually done what you're talking about, your words have an authenticity that resonates at a deeper level. That's what's back to the principle we started with. Work in silence, let success speak. There's a natural order here that many try to reverse. They want their words to create their success rather than their success authorizing their words. But the most influential voices have always been those that earned the right to be heard through their contributions first. They worked, then they spoke. They achieved, then they explained. They built, then they taught. And because of that sequence, people listened. As you move forward from here, you face a fundamental choice in how you'll approach your goals and ambitions. Will you talk about what you're going to do, or will you simply do it? Will you seek attention, or will you seek achievement? Will you focus on being noticed, or will you focus on being worthy of notice? The path of working in silence isn't the easiest one. It lacks the immediate gratification of public declaration. It requires faith in a process that unfolds gradually rather than instantly. It demands the patience to build foundations before, but it's the path that leads to lasting impact rather than fleeting attention. It's the path that builds genuine achievement rather than the appearance of achievement. It's the path that creates a legacy based on contribution rather than commentary. Every day, you have opportunities to choose this path. Every time you feel the urge to talk about what you're going to do, you can choose instead to simply do it Every time you're tempted to seek validation for your intentions, you can choose instead to seek progress towards your goals. Every time you want to explain how hard you're working, you can choose instead to let your results do the explaining. These choices might seem small in the moment, but accumulated over time, they lead to dramatically different outcomes. They determine whether you become someone known for what you say or someone known for what you accomplish. The world is full of talkers. It needs more doers. It has plenty of announcements, but too few achievements. It has countless declarations of intent, but not enough demonstrations of impact. Be different. Choose the quiet path of meaningful contribution over the noisy path of constant declaration. Choose to build something worth talking about, rather than talking about what you might someday build. Work in silence. Let your success speak. When it does, it will say more than your words ever could.